Welcome to the official YouTube channel for me, the Colin Cowherd Podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button right there so you don't miss any of our football content this postseason. Going to have instant reactions after every big game. Thanks. Our Week 18 reaction is presented by Uber Eats. Get game day deals all season long on Uber Eats. It's time to look at this weekend's tastiest matchup in this week's Monday Night Football, brought to you by Uber Eats. All right, we're doing a Monday afternoon, Monday night version. This past weekend was pretty choppy, and I went to Chicago to hang out with Ann and family. So I let John Middlekauff, former NFL scout, take over the controls. So instead, we'll do a late Monday afternoon podcast. We got a lot of stuff to talk about. There's coaches getting fired left and right. Jerod Mayo out in New England. Doug Pederson. You know, it's weird about these coaching ejections. Like Doug Pederson in Philadelphia with a strong foundational owner and general manager had some real success. And then you put him with Trent Baalke and the Khan family and in a shakier franchise, and he takes the fall. You know, it doesn't matter if it's, Tom Coughlin, I guess, is the last coach that consistently won there. Of all these openings right now, we know we got the Jets and the Saints and the Bears. We've got the Jags in New England. Is there one that's attractive to you? If you were in the market to be a coach, is there one, John, that's attractive to
Well, I
you?
got to start by saying happy birthday. Happy 50th.
Thanks. Yeah, there you go, buddy.
I would say the Jags would be last on that list. That is the place where, let's face it, careers for coaches go to die. And the
Yeah.
Trent Baalke situation, for a guy that started at Bemidji State in the Dakotas, he's a pretty good politician. He's run through a lot of coaches in his career. And that connection, part of being in a front office, you get an unfair advantage during the game when the coach is on the sideline with the players. You're usually sitting next to the owner in a Diet Coke talking crap about their decisions. I think easily New England when you factor in the quarterback and the longevity of the history they've proven with Bill of, just letting a guy run it. Now, they said Elliott Wolf, who I don't know personally, I've met him a couple times over the years. At one point in time, he looked like the future Packer GM, but they said he's going to stay. So if Vrabel or whoever is interested in that job, do I have to work with this guy? Is he technically not the GM? He's just the head of personnel. It's a little clunky. All these jobs are pretty clunky, Colin. And I think one consistent theme we saw, these owners don't want to, ideally they don't want to go on a search, because on these searches with coaches and GMs, they're speaking Chinese while the owner's speaking Spanish. It's easy for them to hire business people. Why? They speak the same language. The coach is coming in talking offensive and defensive scheme. It'd be hard for me to follow, let alone these guys. So I think when you saw John Mara, Jim Irsay, Stephen Ross, they just wanted no part of it. I really think New England, just so desperate for Mike Vrabel, which I totally understand, is why Jerod Mayo, they put out a statement of, I would guess, easily over 1,000 words, like 5 minutes after the game. You don't write that. That thing was written on Saturday, Colin.
Yeah, it's interesting. I agree with you. I think the Patriots is the best gig. Chicago's so political. All the Chicago teams right now are struggling. The White Sox are historically bad. The Wills family with Blackhawks, they've got $1 billion business beyond the hockey team. But, Reinsdorf, the Bulls situation, the Bears, the McCaskies, it's not a city, despite being, third largest American city. It's not a city with rich owners. It's got sort of older owners where the team is the primary business. How do you grade the Bears as a job? There's obviously some upside, but I consider this, and maybe this is something coaches don't think about, but Jesus, the Packers win. The Lions have everything in place. The Vikings have always been a pretty solid, well-run organization with what is the hot young coach in the NFL. Do you consider that? Do you consider or do you just go get the coach? The coach doesn't think about it. I mean, Harbaugh saying, I want to take on Andy Reid. But the truth is, Denver and the Raiders are kind of been wobbly
Yeah.
franchises for most of the last 7, 8 years. Are the Bears is that a
I
good
think it's a
job?
terrible job. And I think it all gets back to ownership. I think it's different, but Mike Shanahan once upon a time took over the Redskins, and you just don't overcome an owner. And I think that's a consistent theme. Listen, whatever Shad Khan seems like a nice guy, whatever's going on there with leadership's bad. The Bears have now a pretty consistent history of, it's a mom. I've had friends that have worked there. They discuss it being a mom and
Yeah.
pop shop. And that was a knock on
Yes.
the Chargers for a long time. What did they do? They built a $300 million practice facility. They break the bank for Jim Harbaugh. Obviously, they kind of luck into Herbert, and it changes their franchise. But they had to start spending serious money. And I fully expect a random guy to be the head coach of the Bears. If I had to guess right now, it'd be like the Arizona Cardinals offensive coordinator. Someone, because that's typically when you just look at the history. And up until Jim Harbaugh was hired with the Chargers, that was kind of there. Brandon Staley, Mike McCoy, Anthony Lynn. I just think anytime you get Kevin Warren and you get Ryan Poles and you get a lot of people, who do I answer to? That's tough to overcome. I mean, the same teams, Colin, basically win all the time. All the time. Listen, we make fun of the
Well, I mean,
Pittsburgh
John, look at
Steelers,
this.
but they win. I mean, if I was Ben Johnson, you know what I'd be hoping? Pittsburgh Steelers get blown out. Maybe Mike Tomlin, we trade him. I'd want to go there. I would not. Chicago's a place where guys go to get fired really quickly. I mean, so we've seen the same thing over and over.
Let me list the top of the NFL draft. Tell me if you've heard this before. Titans, Browns, Jaguars, Raiders, Jets, Panthers, Saints, Bears. I mean, it's just like, and increasingly the Giants. It's the same teams every year. And I've argued this forever that it's the ownership. That's what it is. You can blame the players, the coach, and the GM, but it's overwhelmingly upstairs. A prime example is there's only one great quarterback that didn't make the playoffs, Joe Burrow. That's it. All the other great quarterbacks made it. The Brown family is arguably the most frugal in the league. Their front office is considered dysfunctional. Nothing against the GM, but they don't make any moves. They're the opposite of the Philadelphia Eagles. They make no moves.
Yeah.
They do nothing clever. Yeah, they don't do anything. They have their 7 picks. They take their picks, and it's one of those things where, generally, John, there's 7 new playoff teams a year. This year, 4, and 3 of those 4 got new quarterbacks. I think as the season is extended and quarterbacks are more valuable, it's easier to pick the NFL. I picked 6 of the 8 divisions right, and the 2 I missed on came down to the last couple of weeks. Like, I've said this multiple times. Raising kids, the days are long, the years fly by. In the NFL, picking the winners each week is hard, but predicting the season is getting easier. And I start looking around at these teams. The only way out from this abyss for Tennessee and Cleveland, New England, Jacksonville is the quarterback.
Let's face it.
I mean, to me, that feels like the only way
Totally.
out.
Look at Cincinnati as a good example. Today, Zach Taylor fired the defensive coordinator, who like a couple years ago, everyone's like, he's one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. Well, what happened? They started letting guys walk. What has Joe Burrow been hammering home at his press conferences? You can't make a living letting good players walk out of the building. Who would not have let them walk? The Eagles, the Niners. When you get really good impact players, you let them walk. Jesse Bates walks right out. Their secondary was atrocious these last couple years. And I think it's really hard to overcome that. And Joe Burrow's forced the ownership to get a little more aggressive than they're typically used to. And it feels like he's pressing their hand. Like, I want T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. And he's probably still going to lose out on that argument. But I hear you. I think that number is going to, the day and age of like this constant huge turnover is dead. Because we also see like these young quarterbacks, it's easier now to play quarterback than ever. It's definitely less physical. Like, you can be a lot smaller than you could 20 years ago because you don't get hit as hard. But it is still very, very challenging. And I think when you add the extra pressures from the outside, mentally it can really break you. And we see that happen a lot. But I think we see consistent teams like who maybe the Steelers, if they ever make a big change at quarterback or coach, could take a step back for a year or two. But like, what other teams, when you look at the playoff picture, do you see having big swings moving forward? Look at Tampa. Tampa's just a well-run organization now. Jason Light just
Yeah.
knows what he's doing. And Todd Bowles is solid. Not easy replacing Bruce Arians, but he's a solid coach. And they got the quarterback right, Baker Mayfield. Baker's a really good player right now, Colin. Like
Yeah.
he's
Yeah. No, I covered the Buccaneers when I worked down there. The Glazer family was non-meddling. Jason Light was one of the best scouts in pro football for years. Now he's the GM. They've always had good players. Brady hands it off to Baker Mayfield, good quarterback play. And Todd Bowles is not, he's not popular. He's on that sideline. He's very quiet, doesn't have much to say. But you always know you get an excellent effort from him. I mean, that team went into LA and destroyed the Chargers. I mean, moved the ball
yeah.
up and down the field on the number one defense in the league. So again, what I think you and I are getting at is I don't think you're gonna see these annual changes in the NFL. I think what we have here is if you have a good young quarterback, I think Mahomes and Allen and Lamar and Herbert, I think Jared Goff still is in his prime. I don't think these teams are going anywhere. I think they're just going to consistently win year
Well,
after
that's
year.
why the Colts are a good example. Jim Irsay sticking with the guys. But like
I love
but
that.
what are they going to do if that quarterback they drafted him fourth overall? He's just not going to be good enough. One, he's not accurate, and two, he can't stay healthy. Like, I mean, he has legitimate health
Yeah.
concerns. You're just screwed. And you actually get the benefit of the doubt if you're Indy because their division stinks. But they're still, how could anyone pick that? I kind of liked him this year because I bet maybe Anthony Richardson becomes a good player, Shane
Same.
Steichen, and it turns out I was wrong.
Same.
And now you definitely can't bet on it from a health standpoint. And I don't know if you saw the visual of Jim Irsay getting carted out. He looked like weakened to Bernie's. He can barely, I mean, he's in bad
Yeah.
shape. So, and he's,
Yeah.
looks like he's 90, 65 years old. So that organization, that's one that was good for a long time. Like I'm just betting against moving forward until they figure out their quarterback situation that they haven't in almost a decade now.
Yeah, I've talked about this. I think the one advantage to there's a couple of things going on in the NFL. If you don't have a great quarterback, and there's about 6 great quarterbacks at any one time in the league, there's a lot of Liam Cohen's a great example. Kevin O'Connell's another great example. There are more smart offensive coaches than the league's ever had, which can take a C quarterback and make him a B quarterback. There's a lot of that. So that's the upside. Secondly, there's more good quarterbacks. John, if you go back to the 2018 class, where now Darnold, Baker, Josh, and Lamar all had career years. That is from 2018 until this past draft class, we've had 3 different classes that give you 4-star quarterbacks. So I mean, it used to be the Elway Marino class we talked about for 30 years. And now it's like about every other draft, every third draft, you get 4 or 5 guys that can play. I mean, this draft isn't considered a strong one. Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders, but Riley Leonard, McCord out of Syracuse, I think he'll end up being like a 3rd-round quarterback that sticks in the league for a long time. Kyle McCord and I just think we're getting to a point. The good news is there's better quarterback coaching. You're getting a more consistent 3 or 4 first-round quarterbacks that can play, but it is pretty clear there is a certain group of owners that are either Irsay, kind of debilitating. They're in a bad state of affairs physically. McCaskey's, they're old, a little bit out of touch, or they're Jerry Jones, where they have some sense of football knowledge they probably don't possess. So yeah, I tell people this all the time. If I am ever, going out with friends and they ask me about my business, everybody likes the NFL. And I always say, there's 7 great owners, 7 great coaches, 7 great coordinators, 7 great quarterbacks. I mean, it's like Spags is unbelievable. I think Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson are unbelievable. Kingsbury as a coordinator is unbelievable. There is a finite number of great. Jesse Minter, I think right now is great. Harbaugh is. Just look at the teams right now, John. How many of them have all 3? I mean, the Chargers now have great coach, great coordinator, great quarterback. Chiefs have that. Lions have that. There's not many. There's about 5 franchises that have everything dialed up: the coach, the quarterback, and one great coordinator. And I think what it's doing, it's dividing the league. It's becoming more NBA, where you have a very strong top, a small middle, and a really soft, weak bottom.
Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, if you had to pick the NFC Championship and AFC Championship right now, you would go Chiefs, Bills, or the Ravens. And last year was Chiefs versus the Ravens. And if you had to pick the NFC, obviously the 49ers missed, but you would pick the Lions. They have the number one seed, and they just have to win one game to get there.
Yeah.
And you'd probably pick the Eagles, who last year imploded, but the previous year were in the Super Bowl. So it's like the same teams. When I went to the Combine last year for the first time in a couple years, and listen, I'm lucky. I got hired by Andy Reid, so I just knew, the Chiefs guys, the Eagles guys, know the Niners guys. You just kind of start seeing the emblems and the way people carry themselves and the way they operate, and you're just like, it was so evident at the Combine, and that was before free agency and the draft. It's a 10-team league. Look at what the Ravens got going right now. I mean, they've been good for what? This entire century? The most competitive foe they have, even though they missed the playoffs, is the Bengals because of the quarterback. But it's really hard to overcome that organizational, frugal mindset at the end of the day. The Steelers, in theory, should be, but I bet it's a 10-point, spread by the time that game kicks off. They have no quarterback help in sight. And the offense, for whatever reason, feels like it's getting worse by the year. And then the Browns, I think everyone thinks highly of Stefanski and Andrew Berry, but you can't overcome that owner. He gave the guy $230 million. And they're just complete. And today, I don't know if you saw the news, I don't know, this is no one's fault, but he re-hurt his Achilles. That thing is just, the Russell Wilson, we've seen Carson Wentz, some of these big contracts, those don't hold a candle to the financial disaster that the Browns have. And what do? Right? They're drafting second. So it's like, okay, let's say you take Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. You cannot have Deshaun Watson there around that. So you just cut him and take a historic hit. You probably have to. And that's what the Ravens have to deal with. Meanwhile, they'll just, at worst, they'll be in the second round in a tight game against the Bills. And at best, maybe this is their year. They're in the Super Bowl. But they don't even have to worry about that franchise. Meanwhile, the AFC West is a good example. Obviously, the Raiders have a lot of question marks. But Andy's really got to try. He's got Harbaugh and Sean Payton, coming after him. Two guys that know what they're doing, that have been around the block, and obviously now have quarterbacks. I think Sean Payton, I saw a headline from our guy Mike Silver that said, you can't do this without a quarterback, and thank God we got one and figured it out. And they're just going to be a problem moving forward.
That was this week's Monday Night Foodball, brought to you by Uber Eats as the official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. I use it very often. Every weekend, Uber Eats best game day deals all season long. Order now for game day.